harder to sort of answer the question, what is the value of regional studies, Latin American studies in this case? What do we have to contribute to the various fields that we're part of? Is the fact that we are amphibian researchers. I don't want the Twitter feed to say, Waisbord just called all of us a bunch of amphibians. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that basically we straddle academic cultures, we straddle geography, we are grounded in different places. We are inside and outside of Latin America for various reasons, whether or not we are academically based in Europe, in the US, Latin America, or somewhere else. We are in a very, that's what I mean by being an amphibian position. And that's, I think, is a unique position. And from that position, we need to think about what are the contributions. And I like to think about contributions in three ways. One is that by studying Latin American media and communication issues, we enrich the debate in political communication, in media studies, or audience studies, whatever we are part of, by bringing evidence, by bringing arguments about sort of ways of thinking or rethinking classical and contemporary theoretical question and empirical debates. So, for example, we heard in the last 2 days studies about soft power and propaganda, the situation, how journalists negotiate political transition or a seemingly opening political transition in Cuba, the question of personalization of politics and the role of various media, whether or not digital media provides a challenge to traditional ways of elite communication, or the persistence of old media in spite of the arrival, the explosion of digital media. I think dealing with these questions is a way of sort of contributing to the debate about theoretical arguments. It's not just an empirical descriptive question about Latin America, but it's a way of engaging with theoretical debates by bringing out cases from Latin America. And to me, sort of an interesting line in common in this research is sort of the forces of inertia. I think that in communication studies, we tend to study change. Change is very appealing, it's very sexy. We are sort of delighted and attracted by what is new, sort of shining technology and all this stuff. And it's very easy to lose track of what doesn't change. And what I heard, and again, that's my own sort of confirmation biases, if you want, a lot of things that have not changed in spite of all the changes. And that to me sort of is more interesting to explain the forces of inertia, the force of conservatism, rather than how things change. Because it's a way of challenging the conventional wisdom that we have in communication media studies, which is the arrival of new technology suddenly changed tremendous things. And the fact is that we have at least equal amount of evidence showing that fundamental structural dynamics do not change necessarily because of the arrival of new technologies. So I think that's a way of sort of calling attention to our colleagues and saying, not just making the argument that things do not change that much, but actually something more nuanced, which is how do we explain change and how do we explain the lack of change, especially given the enthusiasm in some circles in communication media studies about things have changed radically in the last 5 or 10 years because of digital media, social media platforms, et cetera, et cetera. I'm reminded of what Bertrand Russell said, that the fact that an opinion has been widely held is no evidence whatever that it's not utterly absurd. So there is something about the fact that it's important to remind ourselves about sort of that yes, change is very appealing, very sexy, but we cannot lose sight of what doesn't change. What else do we do as researchers interested in Latin America? A second contribution is not just to bring findings or arguments to discuss theoretical questions discussed in the Western world or somewhere else in the non-Western world, but it's actually to raise new questions, to bring up questions that are not sufficiently studied in the literature because the empirical phenomena are not central as the way they are in Latin America. We know that the body of media studies and communication studies is grounded not only on theories produced in the West, but on questioning empirical developments that happen in the West. And therefore, there is a gap of questions that are things that have not happened in the West, or at least have not happened for a long time. So, for example, when we think about the articulation of media, civil society, and the state in Latin America, it's not an excuse for this organization. The same thing that we have in the US, or I would say much of Western Europe. It's a different kind of articulation. The question of the relationship between journalism, violence, and peace, as we heard here in the case of Colombia and Mexico, is something that really there is no strong cases in the US, Canada, or much of Western Europe to understand how these three questions are related. The question of human rights and communication. What we heard today about testimonies from victims, from survivors. The questions of witnessing, trauma, and truth are questions that are central to Latin America in ways that are not central to the mainstream field, again, for obvious reasons. What Dan and Maria just discussed, the configuration of media systems is different. So it raises new set of questions. Questions about poverty, inequality, and social exclusion, which are central to Latin America. You can't understand much of Latin America without addressing these issues. These are central to the way we ask questions about communication and media. Questions not necessarily are present or are foregrounded, let's say, in the Western world, because the dimensions are not as acute, as sharp, as very much of Latin America. Media policies. We have much to contribute in different ways to think about media policy. We heard a lot, and Isabel today talked about this question of media policy against neoliberalism, which has become sort of the dominant question of media studies, particularly around policy issues in the last decade or 15 years in the West. And I was thinking that when I was in college, people were already talking about neoliberalism. I went to college a long time ago. During the military dictatorship, they were seen as the harbingers of neoliberalism. That's what in the late 70s, early 80s, Latin American researchers were really written about. So for me, academically, I don't know a time outside of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is intrinsic to what has been Latin America for almost, between 30 and 40 years. So neoliberalism in some ways is of the air we breathe. It's not something that is a new phenomenon. It's like post-colonialism. I'm always interested when Latin American researchers grab onto latch onto the post-colonial. Latin America has been post-colonial for 160 years. And some of the questions that post-colonialism raised, at least in Western academia in the last 15, 20 years, were questions already that Latin American intellectuals were asking 100 years ago, 150 years ago. So it's a way of sort of rethinking questions, or bringing up new questions that are not central to the field for obvious reasons. And the third contribution, and with this I will conclude, is sort of how to think about conceptual and theoretical development, which has to do with what Edward Said called traveling theories. Traveling theories about basically how theories travel around the world and how they are adapted, adjusted, changed, tweaked when they are applied somewhere else outside of the quote-unquote original home. And I think that this is it's a question about the sociology of intellectual knowledge. Many of the questions and theories that we have in the field beg the question of whose concepts are this, whose arguments are this. These are all ideas grounded in a specific place of academic production that necessarily in Latin America we have to think critically rather than use them acritically. And this is something that I think we need to do much more. Basically, how do we produce sort of unique theoretical propositions or concepts that are grounded in the theoretical, sort of in Latin American research and Latin American experiences, rather than just using categories that in some ways are grounded in a different category. Of course, I'm not defending intellectual essentialism here. I'm basically making an argument for a more dynamic and hybrid way in which we think about intellectual production. And my sense is that still much needs to be done in this regard. What are the contributions that we all, make to refining concepts, coming up with new concepts and new arguments based on our research in a specific region of the world? And I can give you some examples of that. I mean, for example, again, the debate that Dan and Mary were having is a way of, how do we come up with new concepts that in ways reflect the particular developments of Latin America. Or for example, I'm thinking about research that Heide did a while ago about sort of thinking what public media means in the context of Latin America that is different from the traditional European model. So it's refining the way we think about conventional concepts or coming up with new concepts that are refractive of these experiences. Or let's say the media and social movement part. And something that was discussed earlier, I'm always struck by how much of this digital transition to media and social movement is conceptualized around the notion of protest. And protest is only one form of collective action. In Latin America, we have plenty of experiences in which the point of social movement is not just to protest, it's to change policies, it's to change the way of participation and decision making. So it forces us to rethink what digital media has to do with it. So I don't know if you get my sense of where I'm going with this. That, I mean, much of the literature on digital media and social movements is produced within specific political and social contexts in which what we conventionally understand by collective action social movement is in certain ways that is not exactly what has happened in Latin America. In Latin America, we have social movements that became government in Bolivia and in Brazil. So we're not kind of just think about social movement in terms of protest, people organizing through digital platforms in order to protest what some government decided to do or threatens to do. It's a much more complicated way of thinking about social movements in the context of the politics of civil society and the state. And with this I conclude, I think that we have done a much better job with number one and number two than with number three. And number three, I think, is a very rich area of action. Basically, how do we produce concepts that are grounded in Latin American research that eventually can be borrowed, can be used in other parts of the world, rather than saying, this is what we contribute, or these are new questions that are grounded in the Latin American experience. So, with this, I think that I will make a call for sort of trying to refine the theoretical scaffolding in media communication studies to understand communication and social change, as well as the process of conservatism or reaction against change. And I think that is a very sort of rich area to think about what is our contribution, not just inside us or this room, but something that can make an impact to the broad field of media communication studies. And thank you very much.